Watching closely.
T-minus 60 seconds and counting.
They say every great magic trick begins with misdirection. The trick has 3 acts: the pledge, the turn, and the prestige. Every step, every action, a trick, a carefully constructed deception where everything you hear and see is but merely a part of a grand illusion.
T-minus 90 seconds and counting. All systems are go.
Victor Sims, the Z historian. Now this is a story that you think you know. The story of a man and a dream. A space dream powered by oil drums and mattresses. Or at least, that's how it seemed to the rest of the world. Or was it? The man was born a prince, a member of the Bemba warrior tribe, a lineage steeped in defiance and in the fierce calculus of battle. As a child, he received the distinctive marks to the temples, a visible pact with the ancestors to guide his hand and sharpen his will in battles yet to come. He was given the name Edward Festus Mukuka Nkoloso. But from a young age, there was something peculiar about him. As a young boy, Edward attended missionary school where he met with few other native boys to receive Western education. As a young man, he would interact with other missionary-educated Africans, including one David Buchizia Kaunda, who equally had ambitions of becoming a school teacher. At school, in addition to English and maths, Edward was taught theology, Latin, and French, languages of empire filtered through the lens of faith. At that time, it was hard to tell whether the white man's education was meant for true liberation of the mind or simply another subtle colonial tool designed to temper the African spirit. Unsurprisingly, as he grew older, to serve an authority greater than that of man, Edward sought to become a priest. However, in 1939, everything changed.
Yeah, that's him.
For Europe, the Second World War was a war for survival. But for Africa, it was something far more complex and left deep scars across the African continent. Thousands of young African men were conscripted into service, not for their own liberation, but for that of their oppressors. Edward Nkoloso would be among the many young African men from northern Rhodesia to fight in the Great War and rose through the ranks to become a sergeant in the Signals Corps, the nerve center of the military machine where messages decided the fate of battles. While other African troops were relegated to carrying supplies, digging trenches and serving tea, Nkoloso was different. He listened, he learned, and he dared master the technology that underpinned the empire's war effort. More than just sending messages to his own troops, he understood the art of deception, transmitting decoy signals designed to mislead the enemy and protect his comrades. To Nkoloso, it was a revelation that communication was not just power, but that a message could be a weapon in itself. But beyond the deception, the war revealed one important truth: that the so-called civilized world was neither markedly different nor infallible. Nkoloso and other African soldiers had seen their so-called colonial masters fearful and shaken, and realized that they too were just men. And soon, African soldiers would begin to question everything.
Docking at Beira, the troopship Empire Clyde brings back the 1st Battalion of the Northern Rhodesia Regiment after 18 months of highly meritorious active service in Malaya. They return with a record second to none for any battalion of any nationality in Malaya.
You were promised that when you come back by the British, we are going to give you your country. So when they came back with his colleagues, the survivors, soldiers, the British people, they changed mind. My father and the other war veterans, they asked the British people, you promised us that after we've helped you to fight the fascism, Hitler, we are going to give our country. So what's happened?
When the war ended in 1945, many African soldiers returned home with medals and stories, but little else. No compensation, no land, no titles, and no freedom. Back to poverty and racial segregation. However, they did bring back something else. Something less tangible but far more dangerous. Awareness. To be sure, the war had exposed the contradictions of colonial rule. How could the civilized West preach democracy and freedom while shackling millions across its own dominions? And so, in the post-war Enlightenment, Edward Nkoloso, once determined to be a priest, turned his gaze away from the heavens and towards the soil of his homeland. If there was a calling to be served, it would not be in the corridors of Rome, it would be in Africa. And the kind of liberation he sought could not come from above, it had to be launched from within.
It is time to get to work.
Wait, Mr. Nkoloso? You can't go in there now.
Please, Mr. Nkoloso.
Commissioner, why are your men digging up our ancestors?
By 1956, the name Edward Nkoloso on the Copper Belt was associated with only one thing: trouble. After returning home from the war, Nkoloso worked briefly as a translator for the Northern Rhodesian government, interpreting not just languages but power, the subtle codes of colonial control wrapped in official memos and administrative decrees. He left suddenly and found himself work as a science teacher, teaching in the colonial classroom, a place where science was not taught as discovery but as doctrine, while African knowledge was cast aside as superstition, folklore, or worse, irrelevant. In an act of defiance, Nkoloso left and established his own school, where he declared African children would learn true science, a science that would free their mind.
We used to teach science, mathematics, and religious. That's what we used to, but especially science. I was very much interested in science.
Interestingly, apart from teaching science, he was also reported to have been conducting suspicious experiments with different types of explosive materials. An African school teaching African children its own brand of science. This was too dangerous for the empire, and soon they shut it down. But by then, it was all but too late. Nkoloso was drawing more and more attention. Stripped of his classroom, Nkoloso took it to the streets, council chambers, and village gatherings. His voice grew louder and his ideas became bolder. He condemned the rise of native tax as nothing short of economic punishment, a leash tightening around the necks of the poor. He called out the Colonial Federation and outrightly condemned it as a fortress built to protect white privileges, while Africans remained drawers of water and laborers in a land that was their own. But Nkoloso wasn't content to just dismantle the old. He was also seemingly equally envisioning the new. He proposed a maternity clinic for African mothers long denied of proper care, a welfare hall for the forgotten and the struggling citizens, including war veterans, and an industrial and technical college that would prepare African generations to rise, not just as servants, but as equals. His rallying call was simple yet profound: equality for all. And in 1955, just a year after Brown versus Board of Education shattered racial segregation in American schools, Nkoloso proposed the creation of an interracial school in Northern Rhodesia, a bold experiment in unity in a country curved apart by race. Nkoloso is said to have exhibited Marxist thought when he was quoted to have said that it was inevitable destiny for Northern Rhodesia as a multiracial society to become dialectic in the struggle for survival. With these words, and after storming the district commissioner's office in 1956, Nkoloso later got caught up in a sweeping arrest of trade unionists. Upon his release, he was designated a restricted person and sent back to his home district in Luwingu in the northern part of Northern Rhodesia. But little did the colonial authorities realize that Northern Province was the hub of nationalist movements, and sending Nkoloso to the north was a big mistake. Now, it's not known when the strange friendship between Edward Nkoloso and Kenneth Kaunda, Zambia's first Republican president, began. But what is known is that both attended missionary school and had met earlier as young men. Coincidentally, a year before Nkoloso stormed the district commissioner's office, in 1955, Kenneth Kaunda and Harry Nkumbula were imprisoned for 2 months with hard labor for distributing subversive literature. Young Kenneth Kaunda joined politics in 1949 as one of the founding members of the Northern Rhodesia African National Congress. As Nkoloso and other African soldiers were returning from the war, by 1953 he had moved to Lusaka to become Secretary General of the African National Congress ANC, serving under the presidency of the seasoned but increasingly cautious Harry Nkumbula. Following their arrest in 1955, Kaunda and Nkumbula drifted apart as Nkumbula was accused by other nationalists of becoming increasingly influenced by white liberals and failing to defend indigenous Africans. As such, the more militant Kaunda led a dissent that eventually broke with the ANC. Meanwhile, in Luwingu, Nkoloso had become a district president of the ANC. A master of deception, it is reported that he and his comrade M.R. Mwendapole would disguise themselves as women to slip past checkpoints and patrols with quiet defiance. And during what was known as the Luwingu disturbance of 1957, Nkoloso launched a sweeping campaign of civil disobedience. It wasn't just the colonial government he defied, it was also the so-called native authorities, the rural chiefs co-opted into the colonial system. During the protest, Africans refused to work as carriers, food servers, and census takers. They further ignored orders to cultivate their fields. The local chiefs, threatened by the uprising of minds and wills, issued a sermon for Nkoloso's arrest. But the teacher-turned-agitator vanished into the bush as if swallowed by the land itself. And for 6 days, colonial officers combed the terrain. Then, as if choreographed, Nkoloso emerged, calm, defiant, with arms stretched, ready to be arrested. But a cult of personality had grown around Nkoloso, and his supporters interfered, leading to a riot during which Nkoloso fled for the second time and was only captured later in the wetlands and imprisoned. As Nkoloso was having his run-in with the police, in October 1958, Kaunda formed the Zambian African National Congress, ZANC. However, due to its militant posture, ZANC was banned in March 1959, and Kaunda was sentenced to 9 months imprisonment, which he spent first in Lusaka and then in Salisbury in Rhodesia. While Kaunda was in prison, Mainza Chona and other nationalists formed the United National Independence Party, UNIP, the successor of ZANC, with Chona as its president. However, when Kaunda was released from prison in January 1960, he became president of UNIP. Soon thereafter, Kaunda traveled to the US and met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Atlanta, a man passionately preaching nonviolence. He also encountered Malcolm X, a man who demanded freedom by all means necessary. Kaunda listened, learned, and returned home with a different strategy, what came to be referred to as the Cha-Cha-Cha or the master plan. Interestingly, it was during this period also that Nkoloso, the once fiery agitator known for his street-level defiance and daring escapes, began speaking of space and a mission to the moon.
Or they'll be only surprised because they will find that we're just they will underestimate our intelligence, but I'm sure we are catching them.
When will you fire off your first rocket, and where will you send it to?
I will fight from Lusaka, and it will go straight to the moon.
We are put in groups, Group A, Group B, and Group C. You have to go under Elieso.
Are you watching closely?